My name is Daniel. I've been working the night shift at a small McDonald's on the edge of town for about 3 years now. It's not the most exciting job in the world, but it keeps the bills paid, and honestly, I've always been a night person. Standing at the drive-thru window from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. never bothered me the way it would someone else. I actually preferred the quiet of those late hours over the chaos of the day shift. This whole thing started about 6 weeks ago. It was a Tuesday night, probably around 1:30 a.m., and the parking lot was completely empty. I was running the drive-thru alone, which wasn't unusual. After midnight, management never bothered sending more than one person to hold things down. I was halfway through a podcast when a car rolled up to the ordering speaker. The voice on the other end was male, calm, nothing remarkable about it. He ordered a large Big Mac meal with extra pickles and a large orange juice. Specific, but not weird. I punched it in, made the food, and waited at the first window. When he pulled up to pay, he cracked his window just barely enough to slide a card through the gap. His windows were deeply tinted, and the angle of the streetlight didn't help at all. I couldn't make out a single feature of his face. I ran the card, handed back the receipt, and waited, but he just drove away. Didn't stop at the pickup window. Just kept going and disappeared into the dark. I stood there holding his bag for a good 4 or 5 minutes. Then I shrugged and set it aside. By the end of the shift, I ate it myself. People are strange, especially at 1 a.m. I didn't lose any sleep over it. Then, exactly 8 days later, it happened again. Same order, same routine. Car pulls up, window barely cracks, card slides through, receipt handed back. Car drives off without collecting the food. I remember pausing and thinking, didn't something like this happen last week? But I couldn't be sure enough to feel alarmed. I told myself it was probably just two different people who changed their minds. It happens. It wasn't until the third time that my brain finally made the connection. The order was identical. The card swipe, the tinted window, the vanishing act. And something about the timing, the voice, the specific combination of items, clicked in my head all at once. This was the same person. The same guy had come back 3 times, paid for a meal, and driven off without taking it. Every single time. I didn't say anything to management. Honestly, the food was paid for, and I was the one benefiting. I started looking forward to it in a way I'm not entirely proud of. Every 4 or 5 nights, this mystery guy would show up between midnight and 3 a.m. and essentially buy me a free meal without explanation. I started calling him the ghost customer in my head. Then one night, everything shifted. It was around 2:15 a.m. I heard that now familiar voice through the speaker. He started with the usual order, and I was already reaching for the cups when he added something at the end. Something that turned my blood cold. He said, "Oh, and Daniel, I hope those Big Macs have been treating you well." I stopped moving completely. My name is Daniel, but my name tag only says D. Company policy. We don't put full names on badges. There's no board, no poster, no receipt, nothing customer-facing that has my full first name on it. There was absolutely no normal way this man should have known it. I stood frozen for what felt like a full minute. Then I leaned into the speaker and asked, voice cracking, who he was. I asked how he knew my name. I must have repeated myself 4 or 5 times. He never answered, and this time he didn't even pull forward to pay. I heard his engine accelerate and then silence. I spent the rest of that shift barely able to function. I kept checking the parking lot through the window. Every pair of headlights made my heart jump. Something was deeply wrong and I knew it. But I had no idea what to do with that feeling. When I got home just after 5 a.m., I found something tucked under my doormat. A folded piece of paper. Handwritten. Block letters. You owe me. You have 4 days. No signature. No explanation. I sat on my kitchen floor and read it probably 20 times. I have no idea what I supposedly owe anyone. I'm a 26-year-old guy who works nights at McDonald's and spends his days off watching movies and going to the gym. I don't have enemies. I don't have secrets. I don't have a complicated past. Nothing about my life makes sense as a target for something like this. I didn't sleep that morning. I kept every light in the apartment on and sat on the couch waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. The next night, I forced myself to go back to work. And of course, he came back. This time there was no food order. He pulled up to the speaker and told me to get a pen. I didn't even have time to respond before he recited an address. It was somewhere on the far edge of the county, a road I'd never heard of. Then he told me I had 3 days to bring him $15,000 in cash and leave it at that address. I almost said something sarcastic because the number was so absurd, but the way he said it, flat and certain, stopped me. He drove off before I could even process what had just happened. I didn't have $15,000. I don't have anywhere close to $15,000. And I wasn't going to go anywhere near some unknown road in the middle of the night to deliver cash to a stranger who'd been stalking me. I wrote the address down anyway and stood there shaking behind the counter. I told myself it was a scam. I told myself someone was messing with me. I almost convinced myself. For nights passed. Nothing happened. No car. No notes. No broken windows. I started to breathe again, thinking maybe it was over, maybe whoever this was had moved on. I was wrong. I was home on my couch around 6:30 a.m., just unwinding after my shift, when I heard a sound like a crack of thunder directly inside my apartment. I threw myself off the couch onto the floor before I even understood what I was doing. My ears were ringing. When I finally looked up, I saw it. The window above my kitchen sink had been shattered inward. A chunk of concrete was sitting in my sink, surrounded by broken glass. I called the police immediately. They showed up, took a report, and I told them everything. The drive-through visits, the note, the demand, the address. They said they'd send someone to check out the location, and they'd increase patrols near my building. What they didn't say was that they could actually do anything. Without camera footage of the vehicle or the individual, the officer told me, there isn't much to go on. That was 5 days ago. I've called in sick every night since. I haven't been able to sleep more than 2 or 3 hours at a time. I've been staying at a friend's place, but I haven't told him why. I keep thinking about the credit card. The guy paid with a card 3 separate times. There has to be a record of it. I'm going to push the police on that this week. I don't know who this person is. I don't know what he thinks I did. I don't know what he wants beyond money I don't have. All I know is that someone's been watching me closely enough to learn my full name, find out where I live, and walk up to my door in the dark without being seen. And whatever this is, I don't think it's over. I finished my marketing degree about 9 months ago, and honestly, the job market has been a complete joke. Nobody told me that a diploma would basically just be an expensive piece of paper gathering dust on a shelf. I'm still crashing at my parents' place in a small town outside of Portland, Oregon, sending out applications that disappear into the void and never come back. In the meantime, I started delivering for DoorDash and doing rideshare on the side. My name is Ethan, by the way, 23 years old, no career, no apartment, and apparently no shortage of poor decision-making skills. As you're about to find out, I usually work Thursday through Sunday nights, somewhere between 8 p.m. and 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning. The tips are better on weekends, and the demand picks up once the restaurants get busy and people start drinking. It's not glamorous, but it keeps gas in my tank and gives me a reason to get out of the house. My parents mean well, but 4 walls and parental concern can only take a person so far. This whole thing happened about 3 weeks ago on a Friday night. It was getting close to 1 a.m., and I was already mentally done for the night. I had one last delivery request sitting on my screen, and I almost swiped it away. The pickup was from a diner on the east side of town, which was fine, but the drop-off address was way out past the edge of the county, almost 45 minutes into a rural stretch of highway that connects our area to the next town over. The payout was unusually high, though high enough that I accepted it before my better judgment had a chance to weigh in. The delivery itself was completely uneventful. I handed off a paper bag to a tired-looking woman at the end of a long gravel driveway. She thanked me without making eye contact, and that was it. By the time I turned my car around and started heading back toward town, it was nearly 2 a.m., and I was completely alone on a two-lane highway surrounded by flat farmland and darkness. I'd been driving for maybe 12 or 13 minutes when I saw them. A pickup truck was parked diagonally across part of the road, with its hazard lights blinking orange into the dark. 2 people were standing in the headlights, waving both arms over their heads. My stomach tightened immediately. Every instinct I had said to keep moving. But I've never been able to drive past someone who looks like they need help. It's a reflex I genuinely can't suppress, even when I probably should. I slowed down and stopped about 25 feet back. I cracked my window maybe 3 inches, just enough to hear, not enough for anyone to get a hand inside. It was a man and a woman, both probably in their late 50s. The woman stepped forward and started talking fast. She had this breathless, urgent quality, but something about the rhythm of her words felt slightly off, like she was reciting something she had practiced rather than reacting to something that had just happened. She said there was a washed-out section of road about a mile ahead where a drainage channel had overflowed earlier that evening and taken out a chunk of the asphalt. She said the drop was sudden, and in the dark, I'd never see it in time. She pointed down the road with one arm extended, finger aimed into the blackness like she was showing me the edge of the world. The man spoke up next. He described a fire road that branched off the highway about half a mile ahead, just past an old grain silo I'd apparently recognized by its rusted roof. He said the road cut east through the fields and connected back to the state highway further up. It would add time, he said, but it was the only safe way through. I nodded and told them I appreciated the warning. Then I rolled my window back up and sat there for a second. Something was wrong. I couldn't name it. Couldn't point to any single thing they'd said or done. It was just a feeling, the kind that lives in your chest rather than your head. I made the decision right then to ignore their directions entirely and keep driving the way I'd originally been going. Sure enough, about half a mile up the road, I passed the old silo with a rusted roof, and there it was, the fire road. It was a single lane of packed dirt that cut off into the fields and vanished immediately into the darkness. No lights anywhere down it. No signs. Nothing. I kept driving. Another mile later, the road was completely fine. No washed-out section, no drop, no drainage damage of any kind. The asphalt was smooth and dry, and I crossed whatever they'd been warning me about, without even knowing where it was supposed to have been. I made it back to the highway in another 20 minutes and drove home without any more problems. But I couldn't let it go. I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, running the encounter over and over my head. What would have happened if I had turned down that dirt road, alone, at 2 a.m., in the middle of fields with no houses nearby, and no cell signal worth mentioning out there? The question kept me up until sunrise. About a week later, I drove back out there in the middle of the afternoon. Broad daylight, familiar roads. The whole thing looked completely different with the sun on it. I retraced my route from that night and found the fire road easily enough. I pulled onto the shoulder and stopped. Something immediately caught my eye. There was a sign that hadn't been there before. Someone had hammered a wooden post into the soft dirt at the entrance of the road and nailed a painted board to it. White background, black letters. It said, "Private property," and "Oh, trespassing." That sign had not been there the night I drove past. I was certain of it. I would have noticed it even in the dark because my headlights would have picked up the reflective paint. Someone had put it up in the days between my first visit and this one. I sat on the hood of my car and looked down the road. In daylight, it was less threatening, but not exactly welcoming either. The dirt path ran straight for about 100 yards before curving out of sight behind a dense wall of tall grass and scrub brush. No buildings visible. No vehicles. Nothing. I decided to walk a little way down it, just far enough to see past the bend. I stepped off the asphalt, and the feeling hit me almost instantly. Standing at the entrance of that road in the open air felt completely different from sitting inside my car looking at it. The afternoon was quiet out there, genuinely quiet, no wind, no birds, no distant traffic. That kind of quiet that feels less like peace and more like something holding its breath. I stopped walking. I was maybe 30 feet from the road, still well within inside my car, and I just stopped. I can't explain it better than to say that the air felt wrong, like I'd stepped into a space where the normal rules had been quietly suspended. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, and then I turned around. I was 3 steps from my car when I heard it. It came from somewhere deep down the road behind me, far past the bend where I couldn't see. A voice. A woman's voice. Not screaming exactly, but crying out, sharp and desperate, the kind of sound a person makes when they are truly frightened and need help. I don't remember making the decision to run. I was just suddenly in my car with the engine on and the wheels spinning on the gravel shoulder as I accelerated back onto the road. I didn't stop until I hit the gas station at the edge of town, 6 miles away. I sat in the parking lot with the car running, and my hands shaking on the steering wheel for a solid 5 minutes. That was 3 weeks ago. I haven't gone back. I haven't reported it to anyone because I genuinely don't know what I would even say. I heard a sound in a field. A couple of strangers gave me bad directions in the middle of the night, but the sound I heard was real. Whatever was down that road, whatever those two people were trying to direct me toward that night, it was not a washout in the asphalt. I've been thinking about asking my roommate from college to drive out there with me. He's the kind of person who would actually do it. If we go, I'll bring a camera and post whatever we find. But right now, sitting here writing this out, I'm not entirely sure I want to know what's at the end of that road. Some answers might not be worth finding. This took place a few summers ago when I was pulling overnight shifts at a cold storage facility outside of a mid-sized industrial town in rural Montana. My name is Marcus. I was 29 at the time and had been working the job for just under a year after getting laid off from a logistics company. The hours ran from midnight to 8 a.m., and the expectation was simple. Keep the building secure, monitor the systems, walk the grounds every hour, and call management if something serious came up. Management, in this case, was a man named Gerald who lived 40 minutes away and who I had spoken on the phone exactly twice in 11 months. Most nights the job was profoundly boring. The facility stored refrigerated pharmaceutical supplies and temperature-sensitive food inventory for a regional distribution company. It sat at the end of a long access road flanked by empty fields, and once you drove past the gate, there was nothing around for miles in any direction. The nearest gas station was a 15-minute drive. I got used to the isolation pretty quickly. You had to. The night things went wrong started the same way every other night did. I clocked in, did my first exterior walk, checked the gate locks and the loading doors on the south side, and settled into the monitoring booth with a coffee and a book. The surveillance system covered 14 cameras total, 7 exterior and 7 interior, all feeding into a single panel of monitors mounted above the desk. Around 1:15 a.m., I got an alert from exterior camera 4, which covered the rear access lane along the east wall of the building. Motion alerts on that camera weren't unusual. Rabbits and foxes set it off regularly, and in the summer the motion detection was even more sensitive because of the heat rising off the asphalt. I pulled the feed up and watched for about 90 seconds. Nothing, just the empty lane and the pale wash of the floodlights and a few moths circling the bulb housing. I went back to my book. The alert came again at 1:40, then again at 2:05, then twice more before 2:30. Every single one from camera 4, and only camera 4. The other 13 cameras stayed silent all night. I watched each alert carefully, and each time I saw the same thing. An empty lane, still air, no animals, nothing I could point to. What started bothering me was something I couldn't quite articulate at first. On the third or fourth review, I noticed that whatever was triggering the sensor seemed to be happening just beyond the rightmost edge of the frame. Not in the camera's view, but close to it, like something was positioning itself deliberately just outside the range of the lens. At 2:45, I grabbed my flashlight and went out to check it myself. The summer night was warm and completely windless, which made the silence feel almost pressurized. I walked the full length of the east lane slowly, running the flashlight along the wall, across the loading door frames, and into the drainage ditch that ran parallel to the fence line. Nothing. No footprints in the soft dirt along the ditch. No damage to the fence. Every door handle I tested was locked and undisturbed. I stood at the far end of the lane for a moment and just listened. Nothing came back. I went inside and sat down and tried to convince myself it was a sensor malfunction. 25 minutes later, I heard it. It was a low mechanical grinding sound, the kind a heavy dolly or a pallet jack makes when it rolls across a concrete floor. It came from somewhere deep inside the facility, past the refrigerated bays, somewhere in the dry storage section at the far end of the building. I pulled up the interior cameras immediately. Aisle 1, clear. Aisle 2, clear. 3, 4, 5, all empty. The cold storage bay cameras showed nothing but rows of shrink-wrapped pallets and the faint mist of refrigerated air. I told myself it was the building settling. Old structures make noise. I turned back to my book and made it through maybe 4 pages before I heard again. This time it was louder and followed by something else. A low impact, solid and deliberate, like something hard being set down firmly on a concrete floor rather than dropped. Not an accident, a controlled placement. I went back to the camera panel, cycled through all 7 interior feeds, and then I got to interior camera 6, which covered the far end of the dry storage section. The image flickered, maybe 2 or 3 seconds of disrupted signal, horizontal static rolling through the frame, and then it stabilized. But when it came back, the angle was wrong. Not dramatically wrong, just subtly, unmistakably off, tilted a few degrees clockwise from where it had been, as if someone had reached up and rotated the housing slightly with their hand. I sat there and stared at it for a long moment. Then I picked up my radio and my flashlight, told myself to breathe, and went into the warehouse. The interior of the facility at night was a different world from what it was during the day. During operating hours, it was loud and bright, forklifts running constantly, workers calling across the aisles. At night, the overhead lights switched to a reduced setting that cast everything in a flat, pale amber glow. The shelving units were 12 feet tall, and the aisles between them were narrow enough that you could only see about 30 feet ahead before the shadows swallowed the rest. Sound carried strangely in there. You could hear your own footsteps echoing back from directions that didn't make sense. I moved down the main aisle toward the dry storage section. My flashlight beam felt inadequate against the scale of the space. I kept it moving, checking between shelving units as I passed each gap. I was maybe 60 feet from the far end when I heard footsteps. They came from my left, somewhere 2 or 3 rows over, pacing parallel to me, unhurried, deliberate, the kind of footsteps that belong to someone who knows the space and isn't concerned about being heard. The moment I stopped walking, they stopped too. Not a half-second delay, not an echo, simultaneous, as if whoever had been watching my feet rather than listening to my movement. I stood in the amber light and did not move and did not speak for what felt like an extremely long time. Then I called out. I used my firmest, most professional voice and announced that I was the on-site security officer, that I was aware someone was on the premises, and that the appropriate thing to do was to show themselves immediately and we could handle the situation calmly. The silence that came back was total. I finished the sweep of the entire storage section. Every aisle, every alcove, both emergency exit corridors, the space behind the receiving station at the back wall. I found nothing. No person, no open door, no window that had been tampered with, no indication of how anyone could have gotten inside. The longer I searched without finding anyone, the worse the feeling in my chest became, because I had heard those footsteps clearly enough that I was not willing to doubt them. Someone had been there, walking in time with me, and they had simply ceased to be findable. The rest of the shift passed without another sound. By the time Gerald showed up at 8 in the morning, I had written 4 pages of notes. He read them twice, then called the maintenance team to do a full inspection of the building. They checked every door, every window, the roof access hatches, the ventilation grates, the loading bay seals. They found nothing compromised. No signs of forced entry anywhere on the structure. Camera 6 was examined and the technician confirmed that the housing had been physically rotated but couldn't say how or by whom. Gerald thanked me for the detailed report and did not look like he believed a word of it. I worked that facility for another 4 months before I found something else. In all that time, nothing like it happened again. But I never fully stopped listening for those footsteps during the long, quiet hours between midnight and morning. Some nights I still think about that amber light and those narrow aisles and the sound of someone walking exactly in step with me, just out of sight, unhurried, as if they had nowhere else to be. I've never talked about this publicly before. A few close friends know part of it, and I gave a statement to the police at the time, but I've never sat down and written the whole thing out until now. It still gets to me in a way that nothing else ever has. About 4 years ago, I was working the overnight shift at a small indoor climbing and fitness center in a quiet suburb outside of Edinburgh, Scotland. My name is Ryan. I was 19, taking time off before university, and the job was straightforward enough that I didn't think twice about the hours. The place operated around the clock, and members accessed the building using a digital fob attached to their membership account. Every entry, every exit, every piece of equipment used was logged automatically in the system. My role was essentially to sit in the staff room, watch the monitors, do light cleaning between 2 o'clock and 4 a.m. when traffic was lowest, and handle anything unusual that came up. Management trusted the technology more than they trusted human judgment, which turned out to be a problem. The facility sat in a mixed-use area that had seen better decades. The surrounding streets weren't dangerous exactly, but they weren't comfortable either. Most of the late-night regulars were shift workers, insomniacs, and an occasional person who just preferred to exercise when the place was empty. After a few months, I knew most of them by name, or at least by face. This particular night, I was covering 9 p.m. through 6 a.m. By 2:30 in the morning, I had finished my cleaning rounds, updated the incident log, and settled back into the chair in front of the monitor bank. The building was quiet. 2 members had checked out around midnight, and nobody had come in since. I assumed I was alone in the building and was halfway through a podcast when something on one of the screens made me sit forward. There was a man on the rowing machine in the far corner of the main floor. I hadn't seen him come in. I hadn't heard the door. His fob entry should have triggered a notification on my screen, and I didn't remember seeing one. I pulled up the entry log and scrolled back through the last 2 hours. His name wasn't there. There was no record of anyone checking in after 11:47 p.m. I told myself I must have missed it. The system occasionally lagged. I looked back at the screen and watched him. He was rowing at a pace that immediately struck me as wrong. Not wrong in the sense of bad technique, but wrong in the sense that it was relentless, steady, mechanical, and absolutely unbroken. I pulled up the equipment monitoring interface and found his machine. The stroke rate was sitting at 42 strokes per minute, which is an elite competitive pace, and it had apparently been holding there since before I noticed him. I watched the counter. A minute passed. 2 minutes. 5. He did not slow. He did not pause. He did not shift in the seat or reach for a water bottle or look around. I switched to the closest interior camera and zoomed in as far as the resolution allowed. He was wearing dark clothing that looked like it had been slept in for several nights. His hair was tangled and hanging forward around his face. What I could see of his expression was completely blank. Not the focused blankness of an athlete in a rhythm, but something emptier than that. His eyes were fixed on a point in the middle distance that didn't correspond to anything on the wall in front of him. His mouth was slightly open. Then I noticed his hands. He wasn't using the handle grips the way anyone normally would. His fingers were wrapped around the bar in a way that looked more like clenching than holding. Knuckles visibly pale even through the low-resolution feed, and his feet were not in the foot straps. They were planted flat against the foot plates with nothing securing them, which shouldn't have been mechanically possible at that stroke rate. I watched him for another 4 minutes without moving from my chair. He had been at that pace for somewhere close to 20 minutes without a single break. We had a policy about proper equipment use and membership verification. I told myself that was my reason for going out there. I got up, took my radio from the desk, and walked out of the staff room into the main floor. The ceiling lights in the main area ran at 60% after midnight. The room was lit but shadowed, the equipment arranged in long rows that created channels of dim light between them. The rowing machine was at the far end near the climbing wall. I could hear him before I could see him clearly. The mechanical rhythm of the machine, the slide of the seat, the catch and drive, over and over, perfectly metered. I came around the last row of equipment and stopped. The footplates beneath his feet were dark and wet. It took my eyes a moment to understand what I was seeing because the lighting was poor and my brain was slow to accept it. The floor around the base of the machine was stained in a wide arc. His feet were bare and had been bare the entire time, and the skin on his heels and the balls of his feet had been worn through completely. He was rowing through it without any visible acknowledgement of pain. His face hadn't changed. Open mouth, fixed stare, stroke after stroke after stroke. I think I said his name, though I didn't know his name. I think I just made a sound. He didn't react. I called out clearly, told him he needed to stop, that I was a facility attendant, and he needed to stop the machine immediately. My voice came out steadier than I expected. He kept rowing. And then, without turning his head or changing his expression, he said something. His voice was low and rough and completely without effort. No breathlessness at all for someone at that exertion level. He said, "Can you see me?" I told him again to stop. He said it again. "Can you see me?" I stepped back and told him I was calling emergency services. He said nothing further. I walked back to the staff room as quickly as I could without running, picked up the phone, and dialed. As I was giving the address to the operator, I glanced at the monitors out of habit. He was looking directly at the camera, not at the wall where the camera was mounted, not in the general direction of it, at the lens itself, rowing at the same pace, feet leaving marks on the floor with every stroke, mouth open, staring straight into the camera with an expression that I am genuinely unable to describe accurately. Then he screamed. It wasn't a word. It wasn't a response to anything. It was just a sustained, full-volume scream that I could hear clearly from inside the staff room with the door closed. The operator on the phone asked me what that sound was, and I couldn't answer. I watched him on the monitor as he kept screaming, still rowing, still staring at the camera. Then he stopped rowing and stood up. He didn't stumble. He didn't look down at his feet. He just stood and walked off the frame of the camera at a pace that was too calm for everything else about the situation. I cycled through every camera feed as fast as I could. Main floor, clear. Stretching area, clear. Changing rooms corridor, clear. Climbing wall area, clear. The last camera I checked was the staff corridor, the hallway that ran directly to the door I was standing behind. He was in it, standing in the middle of the frame about 8 feet from the staff room door, perfectly still, staring toward the camera. I have no explanation for how he accessed that corridor. The door at the far end required a staff key card, and there was no record of it being opened. I locked the staff room door. The handle moved 4 seconds later. Not rattled, not forced, just turned slowly, all the way, testing the lock with a patience that was somehow worse than aggression would have been. I backed into the corner of the room and kept the phone to my ear and told the operator the situation. She told me police were 6 minutes away and to stay on the line. He started screaming again from the other side of the door. It was unlike anything I had heard before. Too low to sound entirely human, with a sustained quality that didn't seem to require breath in the way a normal voice would. It went on and on while I sat in the corner of that room with my back against the wall, certain that if the lock gave way I was going to be seriously hurt. It lasted approximately 4 minutes. Then it stopped. I did not move. I did not check the cameras. I sat in that corner until I heard knocking and a voice identifying itself as police, and even then I didn't open the door until I heard the second officer confirm the same thing from outside. They searched the entire building. Every room, every corridor, the storage areas, the roof access stairwell, both emergency exits. He was gone. The blood was still on the floor, and the footplate and the equipment monitoring system still had his session logged, the only record that he had ever been there. The entry log still showed no registered check-in. The police took my statement, took photographs of the machine, and told me someone would follow up. Nobody ever did, as far as I know. I handed in my notice the following morning by text message and never went back to collect my things. I don't know who he was or what he wanted or how he got into that corridor. I don't know how he walked on those feet or how he screamed that way or why he disappeared the moment the police arrived. What I do know is that I think about the moment he looked directly into that camera lens, and I wonder whether locking that door was the only thing that mattered that night, and whether he let me lock it on purpose.